the Polycrisis, and we have an excellent batting lineup. Leslie Fook, Director, AI, Automation and Analytics at INCUS Services Limited, who I've known for a long time. He's not just a name. He's a legend in the world of business, recognized for his groundbreaking digital transformation strategies and mastery of technology. His expertise is unparalleled, etching his name in the records of business leadership across the Caribbean. With a career spanning over 2 decades, Leslie has fortified himself in diverse fields, including analytics, robotic process automation, and artificial intelligence, applying his knowledge across the private and the public sectors and making a significant impact in both. We also have Brenda Bowman, Consultant, Learning and Development in Inclusive Leadership at the IFC USA. Brenda's career spans over 20 years. There's sort of young people with us as a specialist in experiential and transformational learning and program design. She has led conferences and workshops on corporate governance and board development throughout the world for bankers, entrepreneurs, leaders of NGOs, government officials, company secretaries, and boards of directors. As a consultant for the IFC since 2007, she has focused on emerging markets, developing materials for corporate directors in Malawi, the banking sector in Nigeria, and co-authoring the Corporate Secretary's Toolkit. Currently, she's the lead trainer for IFC's Women on Boards and in Business Leadership program. And last but not least, we have Tracy Gibson, Director, Insurance and Pensions Supervision Department, the Bank of Guyana. Tracy, she served as the Assistant Commissioner of Insurance with the then Office of the Commissioner of Insurance until this latter agency was incorporated into the former's operations in 2012. Altogether, from these 2 appointments, Tracy has garnered more than 18 years' experience as an insurance and pensions regulator. Prior to that, she was an officer of the Guyana Defense Force, where she became the officer commanding its legal department and legal advisor to the Chief of Staff before demitting office in 2005. So you can read the rest of their bios in the materials that were shared. Battling the Polycrisis. I like the pensions angle, I like the AI angle, I like the leadership angle. Leslie, lead us off.
So pleasure being here. I didn't really prepare anything, but I am more of a sunny skies kind of person. So when I saw the topic Polycrisis, I was like, so I like Richard's lead off in terms of poly opportunity. And that's kind of always the way that I see the world. I believe that, you know, there are more millionaires created during times of crises than any other time. And I think we left to the biggest opportunity in front of us. If I were to kind of start off, I guess with the AI angle, as you introduced me, Nigel, it goes back even before that. It's really in terms of data. And my first organizational crisis, my first disruption was around 2010. And at that point in time, I couldn't figure out what was going on. What I did know is to get out of a jam, because I was losing clients left, right, and center. We had contracts that we'd easily win that we weren't winning anymore. We had people that we contracted with that were terminating contracts. So we couldn't figure out why. So what I did know at that point in time is that I needed to make better decisions. And to do that, I ultimately needed data. The challenge was for me is back then I couldn't code, I couldn't program, I couldn't script, but I wanted the ability to look around corners, to predict the future. But I couldn't even make sense of the past. So I spent, you know, weeks banging away at it and I wasn't getting anywhere. And eventually I kind of did what anyone needed to do, you know, anyone who has really tough questions in life does. So I Googled it and I stumbled upon, you know, different Gartner reports, and eventually I landed up on YouTube and I saw a video that absolutely changed my life. I saw a guy analyzing data and he was just double clicking and dragging and dropping. So I downloaded the tool and I threw my data at it. Now, at the time I had a preconception that this data thing was difficult. But this tool was easy, and I was zipping through the last 5 years of data, and I figured out what was happening. So 10 years ago, I was really a victim of globalization. We talked about localization today, but back then, it was actually my partners that were eating my lunch. They were now offering something called cloud. This is 2010, right? So cloud adoption was now starting to kick in the territory. So I went to my business partner. I said, look, what we do today as an organization, it's going to completely change. So a couple of speakers earlier talked about changing your business model. And we do that. We continually revel in discomfort, knowing that what we do today will change or could change very, very soon. But what I did as well back then is I recognized an opportunity for data. Fast forward a couple of years, we'd already built. Now, back then we were serving just small, medium-sized customers just in Trinidad and Tobago. But when we went on this data journey, I knocked on pretty much every single door in Trinidad. And I hate to be the one throwing stones, but in Trinidad, good decisions, bad decisions, back in 2010, we were still very profitable. So I knocked on every door, and nobody was really interested in this data thing that I was offering. And that led me to expanding territory. So I organically, I had no choice, but I started to look at different territories. So Jamaica, Bahamas, Barbados, Guyana, Suriname, and I started to spread across the Caribbean because nobody was interested in what I was doing just in Trinidad alone. And I think that is where a lot of the organizations today, they really are. So because of disruption, because of COVID, they are looking overseas to expand opportunity. And it's strange, like I get calls regularly from people who, for me, at that point in time, had way bigger companies than I did. But now they're reaching out to me and asking, how do I get into Jamaica? Who do I speak to? How do I do this? How do I do that? Because we've navigated all those things. So by 2018, we built out a practice that was really serving the Caribbean. And I don't mention this to brag, but to say that, it was a lot of hardship that led that. It wasn't strategic. It wasn't visionary of me to want to do those things. It was, I really had no choice. But by 2018, we built out a really great practice. And what I knew was this AI thing was coming someday. And I went out. Now, I still had the same problems I had in 2013. I couldn't script, I couldn't code, I couldn't program, which is, as leaders, for most of you folks here today, that is not a base skill that I think most people on the planet have. If you could tell me, in your organization, who's an expert at Excel, you'd probably say like 5% of the organization. So these sophisticated things, even though we need to use AI today, most organizations aren't well equipped with it. And I still am not, even though I'm considered one of the AI gurus across the Caribbean. But there's a different way. So what I discovered is that a lot of what's happening today is really being automated. So back in 2018, I discovered a company that was automating data scientists. You basically take a data set, you hit it, you put it into the system, you hit a big red button, and 30 minutes later comes back a completed model that you could basically put into production. So while a lot of these things sound very technologically advanced, very scary, a lot of it is automated today. But kind of coming into that journey, we started to train data scientists across the region for the Actuaries Association, for the TTIFC, and life was great. But then COVID came, and what happened immediately after COVID is that I've been working remotely since 2015, so it wasn't tough for me. I kind of enjoyed it actually. I had a lot less time in hotels, but for a lot of the younger folks on the team, they were going through a lot of mental health issues. And I'm sure that's the same for a lot of you folks here today. So we had three choices at that point in time. One, I could just fire everybody and do a full set. Two, I could try to scream and beat and kick people into submission, and that I didn't think was helpful. Or three, we could try to find better ways for people to work. And that's kind of what we did. So given our background in AI, what we started to do is develop little AIs that were good at just one single task. Just one single task, little AIs that would do one thing. And the team applied them immediately to their daily tasks. And our performance, it went back through the roof, right? So we were able to do the same that we were doing pre-COVID with the mental health issues, but people now were able to buy back their time. At the same time, we were developing a lot of processes and SOPs for everything. So, I mean, a lot of you folks here who would have heard that process will set you free. And that's what we did. So we started to develop processes and systems for everything. Now that we had these processes and we understood clearly well-defined steps, and we had AI that could do each of these tasks for every step, then we connected our AIs together and we created fully autonomous processes. Now, most of you guys are wondering, like, what does this have to do with you? If you think about a knowledge worker, and if anybody ever done like knowledge, time management or productivity training, you probably would have come across something called time blocking. So time blocking is you have an 8-hour day, you're a knowledge worker. Nobody works for 8 hours a day, but let's say you have an 8-hour day. You assign one task per hour. So at the end of the day, you do 5 to 8 tasks. And that's how a lot of productivity trainers, they teach you to become more productive. By the end of the year, typical knowledge worker does 9,600 tasks. And that's not big math or anything, but what we've been able to do by systemizing and then introducing AI to do these fully autonomous processes is that we run about 10,000 tasks a day. What does that mean? That means that we added 365 people to our team without $1 in payroll. So we've basically 18x'd our workforce, and that's how, as a small organization, we are scaling up and we're trying to take advantage of the opportunities that present themselves. Because the team is grown, we've added more people to the team over time, but really the impact that we have is by leveraging technology, especially AI, really, really heavily. So I don't know if that's a little bit of a warm up there, Nigel.
Thank you very much. Just to be clear, you said the typical person is 9,600 tasks per year, and you and your systemification, 10,000 tasks per day, right?
A day, yeah.
That's what you just said. Okay,
Yeah.
we will dig into that after. So let's get Brenda to talk about her contribution to battling the polycrisis.
Well, thank you so much, Nigel. Well, as soon as I heard this title of this panel, Battling the Polycrisis, I knew that I wanted to talk about my work with the IFC and with a program called Getting Women on Boards and in Business Leadership. And one of our goals is to give support to women leaders who are particularly have been and continue to battle the crisis. We've done this through 25 countries. We've run this program, and we've worked with over 750 women. And interestingly, more and more men are coming to join our program. And late in 2021, we did a series of videos. We interviewed 8 women leaders worldwide, and we asked them how they had managed in COVID-19. And each one had a fascinating story. So to give you a couple of examples, there was a woman who runs the largest taxi company in Jakarta in Indonesia. And she turned that on the dime and turned that taxi service into a food delivery service throughout COVID and managed to keep her employees all there. A second example comes from Pakistan, where there is a vice president for marketing of a company that makes hosiery. Probably the socks you are wearing right now come from Pakistan. And during COVID, they reconfigured their whole production line and brought in safety measures and did not let go one of their 23,000 workers who were in the business. And after we'd done these interviews, we said to these women, so what are the big lessons that you learned? And they came up with 2 lessons, all very clear about this, is number 1, don't panic, keep calm. And number 2, take care of your people. And I think that's the point at which I realized that all of the research, all of the discussions, all of the workshops I had been giving on leadership really crystallized in my thinking. And I realized that regardless of gender, leaders navigating companies through crisis have named and mainstreamed emotional and social intelligence. And they're not presenting this as a soft interpersonal skill, something nice to have. They are presenting these skills as essential to the foundation of the sustainability of a company in good times, and critically important during times of crisis. So it's been a massive shift in the thinking where, as women, I have seen women leaders knocking on the door, trying to be heard and being dismissed and put to one side because they're considered too soft. They're not considered these real leaders that are able to make the tough decisions. And it was through that understanding that through working with these women, that I've come to understand also that we live in a world of crisis and we live in a world of VUCA. We live in that, the VUCA, which is volatility, uncertainty, ambiguity, and complexity. And certainly in this morning's discussion from Gillian Tett, we heard a lot about that.
Mhm.
And my question that I had to ask was, how do these women and how do these leaders stop themselves by being triggered, by living and working under constant threat and uncertainty? And how do they manage to avoid the off-ramps when they are triggered of fight, flight, or change? How do they stop themselves from doing that? And this is where we have found the work of a man called Professor Hunter at the Peter Drucker School of Management. He writes about how not understanding what goes on in our nervous systems may be limiting our choices, maybe trapping us into actions that don't help us and give us results that don't work. Now, Professor Hunter divides our nervous systems into 3 zones. He says there's the red zone where our nervous systems are overcharged. And this is a place of anxiety, rumination, and physical tension. At the other extreme, there's the black zone. And the black zone is an area of depression, of low physical energy, and of withdrawal. And according to Professor Hunter, during our lifetime, all of us have moments when we go into the black and the red zones. But, and this is his main point, that the red and black zones are meant for short-term occupancy and not long-term residency. And I think that is much of the struggle for leaders, particularly under crisis, that they get caught either in this red zone or in the black zone. But Professor Hunter explains that there is in the middle a green zone where we are vital, where we feel alive, where we are able to listen to different points of views, where we can think long term, and where really the vitality and the energy and the enthusiasm flourishes. So the question rises for me is, how can leaders build their resilience and spend more time in the green zone, particularly in an era of polycrisis? How do they manage to lead with emotional and social intelligence and live in a world in a kind of framework that we have found has been developed by Bill George, which is VUCA 2.0. And VUCA 2.0 stands for vision, understanding, courage, and adaptability. And I think in listening to the panelists this morning, certainly we were hearing stories of leaders who did exactly that, those transformational leaders who have the vision, who have the purpose-driven that Richard spoke about, who have the understanding of the need to listen to their employees, and who have the courage and the adaptability to be able to care for the people who work for them. Now, some leaders I find manage to do this on their own, but what I have seen is a growing demand for programs like the one that I run at IFC, and like the ones similar to the programs that the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute runs, another IFC and other IODs run. What these leaders want is they want, first of all, to be able to keep themselves calm. And that's not easily done if you think you are isolated and you're on your own. And without the calmness radiating from those leaders, it's very hard for a whole organization or for a team to keep in balance. And also, as was mentioned just now by Leslie, I think this issue about mental health being and mental well-being is increasingly important among our employees, among our stakeholders. And I'm like somebody else this morning who said, I'm going to grab that term and start using that a lot. It's the people that we work with, that they are asking questions of leaders of how do we cope with some of these difficulties? How do we cope with some of the frustrations and the anxieties? And I think it's it is presenting a huge opportunity for IODs and for other institutions to be able to help those leaders reach that point of balance where they themselves feel calm enough to provide the psychological safety and security that their employees need in order to be able to perform well, particularly in times of crisis. So there's my 2 cents to the battle in a polycrisis situation.
That's more than 2 cents. I think that's like about $100. So just putting it into context. But let's hear from Tracy. Insurance and pensions and defense. I don't know. You help us. How can we? I mean, somebody from the defense force should really help us to battle the polycrisis, right?
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. I don't know if I can add anything profound to what was said earlier this morning and a while ago. I can only provide some reinforcement. My approach as a regulator to the polycrisis, I take a lot of, but some of what I do from Nazim Taleb's book, The Black Swan, because after the crisis in 2008, when his book came out, there were 3 things he spoke about that resonated with me. And one of it was those who are least aware of the Black Swan coming will suffer the most from its often already extreme consequences. And I think Leslie spoke just now about persons who, in the face of the crisis in 2008, made off. I don't like the word made off, but they were able to capitalize on the crisis and they were able to become successful. They made a lot of money off of it. And so the whole idea of being aware that it's coming, but what is coming, I think is the challenge. And what we as regulators would like to emphasize to companies is that they need to understand the interconnectedness of everything, and for boards to understand the interconnections between different crises that will affect their organization. And this would involve identifying relationships between the various crises, such as financial challenges, reputational, operational disruptions, and of course, regulatory concerns. We would I think we spoke about some of these crises, climate change, and so on. Conduct comprehensive risk assessments to identify and prioritize the risks associated with the polycrisis. And this would involve evaluating the internal and external factors that contribute to the crisis and understand how they interact with each other. I don't want to emphasize scenario planning. I know responsible companies would do this. Clear communication, as Brenda said, strategic decision-making, oversight and accountability for boards. And I think everyone spoke about adaptability. I would like to add agility and adaptability. And so you have to be agile and adaptable, being open to change, adjusting your strategies as information emerges, and willing to make the corrections as needed. Resilience building, focus on building organizational resilience to better prepare for the crisis. And this is investing in robust risk management practices, strengthening your governance structures, and fostering a culture of preparedness within your company. Stakeholder engagement, I think Jillian spoke about that. That's so important. Key stakeholders, employees, your customers, your suppliers, the community, your regulator. All of these come together to help to battle the polycrisis. The other thing is Taleb spoke about don't use your past to explain your future. We predict that what will happen in the future by using our past. I did not see COVID-19 coming, even though we tried to model and predict what will happen going forward in the future. Yes, we can weave a narrative that makes sense to anticipate what the future will hold, but there are many unknown factors that could change it. And this is where all that I said before would kick in. And I think it was Richard who spoke about not being scared. We can't just add all the probabilities and decide that we will get a particular outcome based on this and that. I know AI is very instructive in that respect, but I go back to Taleb, who said that because if we miss the train, it's only painful if we run after it. We have to be bold as well. I'm not a company person, I'm a regulator, but I expect companies to be bold and not be afraid of what the future holds. And develop your strategies in a robust manner. Know what your outcome, what is the outcome you're looking for, and go after that. I don't know if I have been eloquent enough to express what's in my head, but that's what I have to say in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. You have been very eloquent. The points are very clear. If the people who are going to suffer are the people who are not aware. I like that. And then, of course, you can't use his history. Although Gillian, I suppose, may tell you that if you look carefully at history, you can learn a lot. And then the importance of being bold. But I want to go back to Leslie with his practical example. In fact, I want a practical example. Give us an example of a little AI.
A little AI, Nigel?
Yeah, you said you developed all these little AIs. I can picture in my head little AIs running around the room, getting up to all kinds of mischief. How do you control all these little AIs running around?
Nigel, I have little kids that getting up to mischief. I have AI that helps me in life. So my so a very, very simple one is how many of you guys here want more emails every single day? So on
not
so on average, we receive 120 emails every single day. We respond to 40 emails. We spend 2.6 hours of our life every single day on emails. So one of the first ones I went after was email. How could we cut that in half? Brenda's probably she's gonna strangle me when I say this, but I have very low emotional intelligence. So I've actually trained my AI to be more emotionally intelligent than I am. So my responses using AI are helpful, are supportive, are nurturing, right, to my team. And AI is actually helping me be more empathetic. I'm able to today cut down by half of the time I spend on email. If I save 1 hour a day, what does that look like? Right? An hour a day by 365, I've bought back 2 full weeks of my life. If I use that day every day, what would I do with it? What would you guys do with it? Probably sleep or not be at work or and I found that I found this report very fascinating, and there's this direct correlation between teenage drug abuse, alcohol abuse, depression, anxiety, suicide, and having dinner at home with their family. So if I had 1 hour every single day of my life extra, I would just have dinner with my kids and family every single night.
Mhm.
And that's one simple use of AI, Nigel. Everybody could probably here apply.
Interesting. I want to go to Brenda. Now, you talked about VUCA 2.0, and you also talk about the importance of staying in the green zone. How do we do that?
I think one of the quotes I heard this morning from Zia was invest in your own resilience, which I just absolutely loved. And I think the reason why I say it's important that people should have support and guidance and teachers even in how to live in the green zone is precisely because we can't do it on our own. We all need teachers. We learn these things as children, but we often don't take all that learning that we have as children, how to behave, how to have our values, how to share, how to be a team, how to take turns. We learn this as children, but it's not taken seriously. And it's when you get to people like Professor Hunter, who seriously explains what's going on in your brain when you let the red zones rise rampant. And often it needs somebody who knows what they're talking about. Just as we need Leslie to be able to talk to us about AI, we need people to be able to explain what's going on inside our brains. And I think this is where IODs and other institutions can be so very, very helpful, because there is a reluctance, I think, to step forward and say, I'm vulnerable and I'm not doing this properly. And how can I do this better? And when you work with peers, if you have groups of leaders talking together and able to say, yeah, I have the same problem, the same thing happens to me. And when you have them being guided by somebody who knows what they're talking about in terms of the neuroscience and how we communicate, magic happens. So it becomes not a case of 1 + 1 = 2, it becomes 1 + 1 makes 5. It's exponential. And particularly when you are working with people who have the same kind of experiences that you have. So an expert just plopping in, parachuting into your life and explaining to you how your brain works doesn't hold. But when you actually discuss this and talk and co-create additional knowledge with your peers, that's where the magic begins to happen. And that's where you can begin to live more permanently in the green zone.
What is an IOD?
Sorry, an Institute of Directors.
Ah, okay. I just didn't want to know. I just wanted to clarify your acronym. All right.
Acronym speak is terrible, isn't it? But yes,
No,
Institutes of Directors.
Now, you referred to Professor Hunter. Does he have a book or something that we can have access to?
There's an article that a very simple article is how to hack your nervous system. And Leslie, of course, will love that idea about hacking our brains. Yes, Jeremy Hunter. And he says that in most management schools, people are taught how to manage the business, but they're not taught how to manage themselves.
Good point. Very good point. Let's go to Tracy. Tracy, one of the things that I am kind of aware of with this crisis is this gig economy, people working not for very long with any one person, everybody on their own kind of stuff. And of course, they move away from defined benefit to defined contribution pensions and the implications for that for retirement. What are your thoughts on that in this crisis?
I think companies being aware of what they're facing are trying, as a form of de-risking, they are actually putting the burden on the employees by moving from a defined benefit to a defined contribution. We know that the defined benefit sets out a specific or a defined formula. And what we have found with the crisis is that there more and more these plans build up considerable deficits, which as regulators, we insist that the employers fund. What employers are finding is that because of the unpredictability of the environment at the moment, the returns on investments can't keep pace with the liabilities that accrue to plans. And so in order to avoid that financial burden, they are moving to a defined contribution where what you put in is what you get. That is challenging in a sense because most employees don't really understand the environment for investments, for pensions, for business generally. They go to work, they get paid, and they know that they get a pension at the end of the day. And this results in a lot of shocks and nervous breakdown when they reach to the end of their working life and they find that what they thought they would get, that's not what, that's not it. I know at the bank, we are in the process of drafting pensions legislation to deal with that, where the trustees would play an integral role. We can't stop the train, we can't stop employers from moving from defined benefit to defined contribution, but we are placing the burden on the trustees to explain to employees what it is they're getting into and what are the likely outcomes based on their saving pattern and the investments as done by the trustees and the managers, the pension plan managers, what they're likely to get. In this respect, I think understanding the risks that are in play with the polycrisis is very important, and the training of trustees for them to understand the interconnectedness and the employers too, because some employers just leave everything to the trustees and the plan managers, and it's only when the employees start to act up, then they take an interest and they worry. I can't say that about most companies here. Most companies in Guyana are very invested in the outcomes for their employees. And so it is, they take very seriously the role of trustees and plan managers and the investments and the return on the investments and how it would affect their employees at the end of their working life. This, at the moment right now, we are in the middle of consultations with employers with respect to how risks will be managed for pension plans, because the current legislation does not address this at all. So it's just a black hole. But going forward, and hopefully in 2024, this should be resolved.
And it goes back to what Brenda said about taking care of your people. If people
Yes.
don't feel that you care, I mean, and understand. So two things. One, you said, coming from Caleb, least aware will suffer most. To the extent that people are not aware of the implications of these changes, they will suffer.
Correct.
And if they are your people, one has that stakeholderism approach to
Correct.
business, where one cares not only about your customers but also about your people in a very real way. And that should, I'm just saying, attract the best people to your organizations and have them stay longer and really contribute in a meaningful way. Let me just open it up for the floor. Kamala, I know you will have the first question, so why don't you ask?
Yes. In fact, one of the questions that I had for Tracy is, how do employees try to help prepare themselves for the unexpected as well? So for instance, one of the things you oversee is insurance in Guyana. And do you find that persons value enough insurance as one of your tools in your risk management kit? We know the world is uncertain, there's so much unpredictability, but do you find that persons see insurance as a valid enough safety net?
No. I think Kamala, you would know this is one of my pet peeves with the industry. I don't think much has been done to sensitize members of the public about insurance as a risk management tool. Yes, some people do it, but it's just a fraction of a fraction. And it's mostly the business sector. Most people see insurance as something that some see it as a scam. I don't want to go back to that presentation. It was very harsh. But most people see it as a scam, and it is incumbent on the industry to word evades me, but to get this out of the mind of the public. And they can only do this through good customer relations and honesty and integrity and ethical practices. And that's one of my points I have for battling the polycrisis: ethical and responsible practices.
Yes. No, I like that notion a lot in terms of how do we get people to trust insurance.
Yes.
And Nigel, if I might take 2 minutes just to share my personal story, which is why for me this is so important. And it was something that I had shared with Tracy and her team in Guyana recently. And it is this, that when my husband died, my kids were still relatively young. And so we had to face, and this is what happens when you lose someone very close to you, the notion of death suddenly becomes very real, that someone can be removed totally from your life. And so because my children were still relatively young, I knew that within their minds would be a certain amount of fear. What would happen if we lose mommy then? You know? And so I decided, because I myself had that fear, what would happen to my kids if for any reason something were to happen to me? And I decided within months after my husband's death, because my husband did not believe in insurance, I have to tell you. And so I carried the financial responsibility of the whole funeral arrangements and all the things that goes along with that. And now having to take care of 3 children who are still in school. And I thought insurance is what will give me peace of mind. And that is what I chose to do. So I went to the different insurance companies where I already had 1 or 2 policies, and I upped them, and I took out new policies with intention that for the next 5 years, should something happen to me, these children will have a safety net that's going to allow them to know they have a house to live in, they have enough money that's going to completely pay for their education. And so financially, at least, they would be well, even while they deal with the grief of having lost both parents. And that is what motivated me, because of course it was not easy. And this is the challenge that we normally have as individuals in investing in pensions. It is very costly. And so I had to sit and have that conversation with my children, that at least half of my income is going to go towards this coverage to give us peace of mind. And it did give us that peace of mind, because I knew the children now were not going to be caught in this trap of mental worry and misery. What would happen if? And so they were able to focus on what is important. They have to get their education done. They have to grow into young adulthood with a measure of assurance that everything would be okay. And this is a polycrisis we face. Within families, within businesses, all of our employees have very similar issues and concerns that impact on our mental well-being. For how can we be as secure as we can be in what is a very unpredictable world?
And this goes back to what Jillian was talking about. Sorry, Tracy, I'll come back to you just now. This thing about free market capitalism and the Wild Wild West. And it is important that we go back to industrial policy and ensure in the legislation or somehow that companies are not just paying workers for today, and then once they retire, and if with the advances in healthcare and that kind of stuff, we can live much longer, that we won't have an income. So industrial policy, how the government comes into the equation is important. And again, stakeholderism versus shareholderism, for want of a better word, is going to be very critical. Tracy, go ahead. Sorry.
Yes, that's a challenge, Pamela and Nigel. The public, at least the public here, most people see saving for a pension as something you can kick down the road. They think they're going to be 25 forever. And then they wake up and they're 50, they're 45, and they start to think about, oh, what's going to happen to me? There's Social Security, but that's not enough. Some people, yes, they contribute to a pension, but at the end of their working life, they want a lump sum. They want it all now. What happens to that money? Do they invest it? What do they do with that money? They spend it. I'm aware of one of my family members. I like to use my family as examples because I can. He got his pension and he went on a tour of North America and Europe. and he just blew it out. And now he's back, and he's looking to those who are working to help him because we're his pension. But that is the challenge with lots of persons. They want it now. Some people, if they have a choice of job, if a job is offering you $100 less, and I'm just using notional money, and a job is offering you $200 more, they will go with the $200 more job, but that job does not come with any pension or any insurance, health coverage, anything, but they get a bigger paycheck. While job A, which gives you $100 less because you have to save for a pension, you get health insurance, you get life insurance. They're not going to take that. They're not interested in that. The other thing is that people are not staying in one place of employment for a long period of time. People are changing jobs rapidly, and that's the landscape that we're seeing now. And so the whole idea of being vested and being able to take your money with you sometimes don't happen, because here in Guyana, vesting periods are varied and they stretch from 10 to 25 years. So within 10 years, some people would have changed jobs 2 or 3 times. So they don't get that money, that employer's contribution. And so all they get is their contribution with a bit of interest. And they just take that money and they spend it, and they go to another job and they work for 3 years and they're not vested. And so by the end of their working life, even if they get a job where they stay and they get a pension, it's not much, but they would have worked a considerable period of time. But all that money that they would have earned did not accrue to them because they were not vested. And that's one of the things we as regulators are trying to do, to reduce the vesting period to 5 years, so that people can transfer their money, or the vesting is more, it's portability, so that if I work here for 3 years and I go to company B and I work for 2 years, that money moves with me. That's something that does not happen here right now. And so that's one of the issues we're trying to grapple with in the new legislation.
Well, Camille said it in the chat, you have individual retirement accounts from the various insurance companies, which should help, so that, in other words, you take ownership of your life after work. And as you move, you can work with the employer to contribute and to help, but it's your retirement account, and it builds up over time, and hopefully people are smart enough that they don't touch it. So thank you very much for that. I just wanted to go back to, well, let's see, are there any questions from the audience? Or,
I don't have a question, but Nigel, I'd like to
go ahead, Brenda. Go ahead.
I'd like to make the comment that the whole tone of this conversation now has shifted into an emotionally and socially intelligent one. We're talking about an economy of caring. And I think that is the solution to so much of this polycrisis, is we have to know how to care. And some of these examples you have been giving with the insurance companies is a fabulous example of being able to transfer your pension from company to company. That's truly that's a battle against the polycrisis taking place there under our very noses, and transforming this into a culture of care.
And I was going back to what you said earlier, because if as an employer you care about your people, you should be educating and encouraging this kind of behavior, so that they don't get caught down the road when you may have parted ways, but you care about them in a very real way. No, it's very sad what happens when people not either not educated, not aware, and therefore face the consequences later on. Well, we are at 1:13, so I'm going to ask you all to wrap up, and I will go in reverse order, starting with Tracy.
Okay, I'd like to emphasize ethical and responsible practices. And Brenda spoke about caring for your employees. For me, the challenge in the insurance and pension sector is for people, stakeholders, to have trust and confidence that their needs will be taken care of if there is a crisis. And that trust does not come overnight. And it comes with a corporate culture that cares for your employees, cares for your customers, your stakeholders, your business practices are responsible. And it's not just chasing the bottom line, not just chasing getting a commission, selling products that don't meet the need of the customer, but making sure that the customer gets exactly or close to what they need based on their profile and you know, their whole makeup. So to me, that trust and confidence is one of the ways that can help to transform the sector and prepare the public and employees for crises as they arise. And those are my thoughts in a nutshell.
Thank you very much. Brenda?
I don't have much to add to that. Thank you so much for this this conversation, except I have one thing to say, that Leslie says he has low emotional and social intelligence. And I'm here to tell you, Leslie, that anybody who would use that extra hour a day to decide to have dinner with their children, supper with their children, is someone who has got a lot of emotional and social intelligence, and who is building the future of this culture of care, this economy of care that we all want to share.
Thanks, Brenda. I know
he doesn't know how talented he is. Don't worry.
Appreciate it, Brenda. I'm a work in progress. But if I had to leave some closing words, it would be, and I learned this lesson the hard way, and I didn't really accept it when it was given to me at the time. But it's never really what happens to you. It boils down to how you deal with it. So whether we see our cup is half empty or half full, it's really our choice. And then, you know, whether we see a poly crisis or we see a poly opportunity is also our choice.
Thank you very much. You all have been a wonderful panel. Kamla.
Thank you very much, Nigel. Thank you, Leslie and Brenda and Tracy. This really has been very real, I think, in bringing it home to persons when we think about the fact that we do exist in a poly crisis, and therefore, you know, how do we respond? Generally, as a governance institute, we focus on the role of the board and the role of the leaders in our management team and so, but we also need to understand that each of us individually play a very active role in how the poly crisis affects us and the choices that we make as well. Now, we are at 11:17 at this point, and if you look at your agendas, you would see that what we have scheduled as the next session is in fact a wrap-up, and what that is meant to do is for us to think through. We have had so many brilliant points made over the last 2 days. What are those points that resonate with you? What may be some of the key takeaways? What are some of the lessons? Or do you still have some burning questions to ask? What do we still need to deal with as we try to make sense out of today's world? So this discussion will be led by Nigel and Professor Garrett for us to see, moving forward. We are wrapping up the year here at CCGI. As we move into the new year, what are the things we're going to take? How are we going to act differently? What would help us be more proactive in this polycrisis situation? So, Nigel, I'm not sure because we don't have a very large audience with us, and I don't want to lose persons. Maybe we could consider, you and Professor Garrett, tell me, should we go straight into that session and let's do that discussion so we can possibly wrap up a little bit earlier?
I agree. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Well, should we test whether there are any other members of the audience who want to ask any questions at all?
Yes.
And then we can go into that session.
Or give observations.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely.
Also, I'm in total agreement with Professor Garrett that we look for any feedback from persons. But I find for some reason this time around, we generally have a very, very interactive audience. But this time around, it has not been as full with debate. I think, Camille, is because we've been missing you. So I'm so happy to see that you've been able to join us today. I know that yesterday was inevitable, that there was no way you would have been able to be part of it. But very happy that you were here with us today.
Well, happy to be here, and sorry I missed all the good stuff earlier.
Yes, okay, nice to hear your voice, Camille. Okay, so Professor Garrett, if I may then, I made a few points, Nigel, that I would like to share just to provoke some thinking in terms of what we have heard over the last 2 days, and therefore what we need to consider in terms of how we move forward. And the first thing that I have noted as a lesson learned emanating out of this is that for an organization, there is no one perfect answer. So we can't sit and say, this is what needs to be done in order for you to manage well in this polycrisis. And that is because no two organizations are the same. And therefore, it requires for all of us who sit in the boardrooms, who sit as senior managers, who are leading persons, to take the time to sift through what does this polycrisis mean for us, and be guided, I think, by one of the key takeaways from Jillian's contribution, which is, what are our values that's going to guide us? The second takeaway I have noted is that there is an urgency to act. So that in every boardroom, there needs to be a revisiting of what we are doing. And that actually was also reinforced by the contribution from Leslie today, when he made the point that they anticipate that there's going to be a constant need for change. So a lot of times we try to stay with the status quo, to stay with what is stable, with what is normal, that would help us to feel we're in control. But I think we need to understand that there is always a need for us to revisit, but there's no luxury of time. There's an urgency to act because of all that is happening around us. My third point is that people continue to be our greatest assets. And so how do we ensure that they continue to feel valued and motivated? And I think today's discussion dealt a whole lot with that as well. Ensuring that people feel cared for. And I love that term that Brenda used to describe it just now. I think she called it a learning. an economy of caring. How do we develop
Yes, yes.
economy of caring? I love that. Right? Then there was, I think, a question we need to try to work through when we look at this whole relationship between governance and management. What Dr. Dennis yesterday referred to as the third team. What really is our third team? How is that relationship that exists between governance and management, which then translates itself into the way persons are governed and therefore the culture of the organization? I think we should be asking ourselves that question all the time. I have two more very short points. One is based on the contribution from Gillian Tet this morning. Really and truly, we see that there are some very important lessons to learn from history. And it helps us to understand the world today, because as she said, the last 2 decades really have been an aberration. That the world today, filled with its uncertainty, unpredictability, vulnerability, likelihood of wars, is the way the world has always been. And therefore, how can we make sense of that in the way we move forward? Oh, and the final point is really that point I made earlier that Brenda raised, which is how do we develop an economy of caring? And I added to that some of what Tracy shared in her final point, which is having ethical and responsible practices in the organization, okay, to very carefully develop our corporate culture. So those were some of the burning points and questions that I felt were raised over the last 2 days that we need to keep pondering on to figure out what would help us as organizations. And there was a final thing that also emerged today, which is that as a Caribbean, we are viewed as one from the outside. Therefore, how do we, as a Caribbean, build that integration where we can have a common approach, where we can work together to ensure that we have a bigger voice or on the stage so that we are less impacted by some of the changes that are made. So those were some of my thoughts. I would love to hear if there were other points. Okay, so Sharon has added some in the end. I love that, Sharon. Would you like to unmute and share it with us? Or do you prefer for me to read it out?
You can do the honors, thank you.
Okay, so Sharon has put in the chat the things that stand out for her. She said, the idea that strategy that is not sustainable is junk strategy. If there's asset stripping involved in production of output, right? Okay, and the polycrisis versus poly opportunity. Yes, I like that too. Polycrisis versus poly opportunity. Historically, crisis has been part and parcel of our existence. So, and the need to change the focus on finance and reporting on company performance. Yeah, Sharon, I agree. These are also some very, very good takeaways. And I see Alistair has also shared some points too. Alistair, I'm so happy that you were able to join us and have been here with us for the full 2 days. Would you like to unmute and share your points?
Hi, Kamala. Thank you for sharing your personal story. And thank you to all the speakers. It's been great. But yeah, just to follow on really from Sharon's comments, sustainability is key. And, you know, in industry, we see so much in new regulation. Insurance, we're seeing IFRS 17. We talked yesterday about the sustainable finance disclosure regulation coming from Europe. And I wanted to, at least impart my hope that we could pay some attention to it, have some conversation around it, and possibly even develop some advocacy such that we're not squashed under the regulation to, which I believe is absolutely right. Our financial reports need to grow from purely being, unidimensional around dollars and cents being created to something that's more encompassing. And I think really well said when you look at a culture of caring and this total stakeholder value that is created year in, year out by these companies. And I think out of our own service to our stakeholders, our customers, our clients, our people, we need to know about that. We need to get more granular. At the same time, I worry that the regulation, and specifically, excuse me, Mr. Romano, but the accountants will crush us in their quest to report on these. And how do we do that, sustainably?
Well, I think Victoria gave us a model yesterday that was moving outside of the what you referred to the intermediate means and ends to encompass natural, human, and social capital and the long-term well-being for all at the top of the pyramid. So that we have to find ways to become a lot more creative. Maybe Leslie can develop some AI, some mini AIs to help us there. But the point is that we need to be looking differently. And this whole concept of stakeholderism, which is focused on communities and how we interact on a longer term basis as opposed to the quarterly and annual cycles. I think to achieve that is not going to be easy, because it's not that we are ignoring the intermediate means and ends, but we are broadening to include those foundational elements. And if we can do that, we should be able to make some progress. It's not going to be easy. I am definitely, and no need to apologize. I've been more of a banker than an accountant for most of my career anyhow.
Right. So Nigel,
We
Charlene
have Charlene and Althea have come in with some comments. Oh,
Right.
Leslie says he had the AI already, so we'll have to go and look for it.
Yeah. So, and I think Charlene is the Charlene Sharp from Jamaica. If it is Charlene Sharp from Jamaica, I know sometimes it's a bit hard for her to be able to unmute and share her thoughts.
Go ahead and read them.
Right. So Charlene says, going back to Gillian's, okay, so it is Charlene, right.
Yeah.
So going back to Gillian's presentation, it seems all states are on the continuum between democracy and autocracy. States move up and down the continuum over time in response to a revolutionary thought or event. But all these changes must take place within a democratic environment. The problem we have now is with the quality of our democracy. This quality is hinged on our economics. Our economics, however, is embedded in our politics and governance structures. So at the end of the day, our crisis is a crisis of governance. To what extent then can the heart of governance be reduced to what do we value? She ends saying polycrisis is a crisis of value. So Charlene Sharp, I will tell you, is a brilliant addition to CCGI. She recently did our certificate in corporate governance training, and we absolutely loved having her because you could totally trust Charlene to come up with something extremely innovative and have us stumped thinking through again some of the assumptions we make about how we do things. So to Charlene's feedback then, that a lot of this comes straight back down to governance, and to what extent then can the heart of governance be reduced to what do we value? So Althea, can we invite you to unmute and join us in the conversation?
As a lawyer, governance professional, and compliance person as well, I must comment on the fact that every time I hear about another set of regulations, I cringe because I'm forever having to justify to my board and to my executives the addition of more regulation, because we have regulation for everything. And the truth is, our structures have changed so much in the last, I have been corporate counsel for 25 years, 26 years, and the level of compliance, and as my CEO says, it takes up the IFRS 17, for example, you know, he always says it's taken up all the oxygen in the room for the last year or so. Because as regulations change, and as we see, you know, the plethora of regulations, I cringe when I hear there's just another regulation. I just wonder how much more can businesses sustain. So while I agree that we need to have standards and sustainability is an important issue, etc., I think we have to be careful that we don't drown businesses with the best will in the world under the heavy arm of regulation. That was my first comment. The second comment would relate to the fact that in any discussion we have accountability, and I know in my own company, we are looking at accountability and having personal accountability statements where our managers and how that rolls out to our staff members, and we're big on that this year, because whether we are in a polycrisis situation or not, the truth is being accountable must be the goal for any organization from the top to the bottom if we are going to govern well, and if we are going to be transparent and meet the highest standards, whether it's in a ultra regulation or, you know, otherwise situation. We need to get ahead of the fact that people will find a way around regulations. People will find a way to, you know, make shortcuts, take shortcuts, etc. But if we have accountability, if we have standards that the companies themselves hold themselves to, I think that's going to go a long way towards making it better for everyone without feeling that we're just ticking the box, but we are actually doing something that is meaningful for the, you know, global citizenship as well.
Thank you,
Thank
Althea.
you
May
very
I
much.
agree, Nigel? I think that this was a huge part of our discussions yesterday as well. That yes, regulation is needed, but it can't be that this is what causes us to do what we think needs to be done. If I may use the example, for instance, with law, you can't wait to have a law every single time to guide how you do things. And as a matter of fact, most often, the law follows what has been the social custom or practice. So as a people, we need to stop and think about what are the things we want to do and why we want to do it. What is the impact of our decision? And then if there is need for a regulator to come in and put standards and all that afterwards, so be it. That's not an issue. But it can't be that we are waiting, and it must always be that there is a big stick over our head before we will do what needs to be done in this very urgent situation.
Well, I think it goes back, Kamala, to again, governance. And for me, the critical thing is purpose. And I always, I tend to put purpose in the context of value creation. So as an organization, who am I creating value for? And what value am I creating for that, for whoever my customers are? And in that context, to the extent that I can create value, my objective has to be to capture enough of that value, to create that value in such a way that I can capture some of that value for myself and my team within the guardrails of my core values. It cannot be a wild west. And you have to be very clear about that and communicate it very clearly. And if you do so, I believe you are going to be able to achieve both creating value that people want in a way that allows you to capture some of that value for yourself. But it can't be that I am pulling the wool over your eyes, because, I mean, Gillian talked about 1989 to 2007 at that period. And then, of course, came 2008. And the financial sector in the United States was creating value for nobody. They were creating value for themselves and pulling the wool over people's eyes and selling junk to unknowing investors. But that's a whole different story.
Yeah, so Tracy had her hand up. Tracy, go ahead.
Okay, I just want to point out from a regulator standpoint, it is not, we do not derive joy from imposing regulations on the sector. Yes, some regulations are necessary because of what is happening at the moment, and in order to protect stakeholders, members of the public, policyholders, and so on. However, because we are talking about polycrisis and understanding the interconnectedness of everything as part of the global community, sometimes some regulations are imposed because we are part of this whole global community, which requires us as small states to implement rules and regulations that some companies may find jarring, burdensome, onerous. We understand that, and as far as possible, we try to see with the companies, the regulated entities, and work with them in its implementation. I know IFRS 17 is something that is killing a lot of companies right now because of the cost and because of all that it entails. A lot of companies would have had to adjust their budgets to implement IFRS 17, but we didn't implement IFRS. We didn't come up with it. This is what the global body decided, that this must be done by insurance companies, and because insurance companies are mandated to follow international financial standards, this is something that they have to do. I'm not going to go into all the challenges that go into AML and all of that, and a lot of times people see those rules as onerous. But like I said, we're small states, we're part of the global community, and these are things that are passed down to us. And for us to remain and not just current, but in good standing with the international community, sometimes these things are put in place. It's not just the regulators that are involved, there's government and international organizations that are involved, and we are just the tool to ensure that these things are implemented.
And I understand what you're saying, but the point is there has to be some. I mean, look, taking the whole view of hearing for your people, we also have to be mindful of the impacts of these things on smaller entities.
Of
and
course.
Find ways, and maybe we can again go back to Leslie to get some AI to help us. But this is a problem that needs a solution, And whoever can come up with a solution here can create a lot of value and maybe capture some value for themselves. I just want to bring Professor Garrett into the conversation. Professor Garrett, you have listened to the discussions over the last 2 days. What are your thoughts? Are we in trouble?
Not at all. Quite the reverse. I mean, I'd like to thank everybody. It's been really exciting 2 days. I'd also like to curse every one of the speakers and most of the audience, because I'm just on the last pages of the last chapter of my new book. And now I'm going to have to go back through every single chapter and just check what I've written. This is both a curse and a blessing. But what I've done is I've made, as you were talking just now, I've made 4 points that I'd like to say impinged on me. And then separately, Nigel, at the very end, I'd just like to make a couple of comments on CCGI, please.
Okay, great. Please go ahead.
So now this depends on me being able to read my writing, because I've been doing it at speed. When I spoke yesterday, my short intro, I was talking about the possibility conceptually of moving away from our 2x2 quadrants and seeing whether we could actually get a mindset that was much more creative and that was about going upwards and onwards. So a much more notion of a helical movement, which takes in 3 dimensions rather than the 2 dimensions of the 2x2 quadrants, and actually takes in 4 dimensions because you add on time as well. And that notion is still with me as I go through. But now to go to the 4 points I particularly picked up, especially Victoria, Dion, and Leslie today, this whole issue of follow the science. Don't be put off by the total noise, hatred, viciousness, etc. in 24-hour media. Don't follow the simplistic paradigms, but follow the science and keep testing that data so that you can turn it into information for yourself and your own organization. And I was very interested in that whole thing about follow the science. And if you look at all of their work, but particularly the work that Victoria Hearth is now going to do at the Cambridge Institute for, notice it's called Cambridge Institute for Sustainability and Leadership. And if you look at the numbers they're beginning to put together there, that is very interesting indeed. And the reason I say that is because, frankly, I haven't heard any dumb speakers or audience members in the last 2 days. We are intelligent. We are intelligent people. But we're also intimidated because of this polycrisis stuff. So I go back to my basic discipline and look at how do we use our intelligent naivety? What are the fundamental questions we should be asking of ourselves and each other around the boardroom table, within the organization, of our stakeholders, without us feeling dumb? We must have the personal confidence, the personal courage to say, I don't understand what you're talking about. Please explain. And this is where a lot of the social media stuff falls apart. It just doesn't exist in the end. It's a lot of rhetoric, hot air. So I'm very interested in how we do that. But then how we discuss it and how we develop our ideas from that takes time. And one of the things I've been noting throughout this is everybody saying this will take time to develop, this will take time to mature. One of the issues we have in most of our boards, including my own, is a feeling that we don't have enough time and the polycrisis is upon us. Well, tough. We've got to find time to actually pause and think and then develop. regardless of the noise around us. So that was one bit. The other bit, and Gillian was very strong at this at the beginning of her session, is having the courage to be able to have this insider-outsider perspective. And most of us find it really difficult to have an insider perspective. You know, when you sit there and you think, oh my God, I hope the accountant doesn't ask me any questions in that particular area because I don't know. Or what on earth is HR talking about? These are things I just do not understand, never had, and most probably never will. So we have that insider worry around the boardroom table. But now we have this polycrisis with this outsider perspective, which is really looming down on us. And that's where, again, the media noise is very, very important. So one of the things I noted, the third point really, was there is almost now a growing public expectation that directors will automatically become polymaths to deal with the polycrisis. Now, that's just untrue. However, it is possible to begin to add together multidisciplinary skills and ideas and knowledge around a board table. If instead of saying what we need is another accountant, what we need is another marketing person, what we need is another HR person, if we begin to say there's someone with finance experience, but also experience of the outside world and specify what those areas are. It could be community development, it could be all sorts of things. It could be port development, it could be to do with climate change or bioscience. But how do we begin to get at least some variety, complexity into the way we select our people? So we're not just selecting by discipline, but we're actually trying to develop some new ideas about the way we deal with this outsider issue, the polycrisis coming at us from all angles. And I think that's very interesting, and it's going to be quite a problem, but it's going to be solved by what Brenda and others have been talking about, by us, by our people, not just us individually and not just the board, but across the whole organization. My experience over the last 50 years, particularly through action learning, is that most people in an organization are actually rather keen to learn, and they're normally suppressed from actively learning in their organization. You go right down to the grassroots of an organization, there are loads of ideas of how this place could be better, how it could be different, how it could be more effective, how it could be more efficient. And those are suppressed. One of the ways of dealing with the polycrisis is beginning to tap into the existing learning and develop that in the organization. I mean, one of my greatest triumphs was in South Africa, where over 6 years we took a failing, massive, absolutely massive state-owned organization and turned it around in the 6 years, working at all levels of the organization, but with the board being seen to be the learning leaders of that organization. But it was also my greatest tragedy, because at the end of that 6 years, when things were really motoring, the politicians changed, they then changed the board, they changed the senior management, and within 18 months, corruption had taken over, and that organization is now back to being an absolute ruin again. So that's both a triumph and a tragedy. But it was the people of the organization that made that, and they are still there now, deeply frustrated, because what they know could happen and has happened now cannot happen again, at least in the immediate future. The last point really was around this fixation thing, and particularly the finance fixation and the regulatory fixation. Just a quick one on the regulation side. You know, I'm very keen, and I think some people know this, that we break away from the notion that regulation is there both to protect people, wonderful, but to protect outsiders, to protect our customers, etc. That's great. But it's also there because people in authority don't trust us.
Mm-hmm.
And that whole issue of trust is an interesting one. What the model I'm looking at the moment is to try and move away. It's rather like moving away from the 2x2 fixation with the quadrants. It's moving away from the soccer referee fixation to the rugby referee fixation. Because the rugby referee actually runs with the pack and comments whilst things are going on and can intervene to stop certain things happening immediately.
Mm.
And that's a very interesting way. And they use a little bit of video as well. But they are actually much more of a coach than a sort of soccer referee with absolute decisions being taken. And I'm very interested in how, again, we can begin to develop this coaching notion at the level of the board in real time. And I suspect, but don't know, that if we dramatically change the role of the company secretary, we might find we have some running coaches, which is a thought. And then that all leads into, the notion of the financial fixation having to be dropped. Finance is still important. I mean, you know, I think we get ourselves into terrible mess because we talk about not-for-profit companies, but they make profits. They have to. We call them surpluses.
Mm-hmm.
But if they don't have a surplus, they're dead, which sadly, many charities and things are finding at the moment. So it's not the profit bit. It's how do we create, back to your purpose question, how do we create a useful surplus to sustain our purpose? And that's a very interesting question that puzzles me at the moment. And in the end, back to Victoria, what we're trying to do is generate sustainable organizations. Now, I was very interested. She didn't mention this once in her talk, but most of the companies I know that are now trying to grapple with the polycrisis and grapple with the notion of sustainability have, rightly or wrongly, fixated on net zero and the year 2050. Now, that may be right or wrong, but that's what they're doing. Again, I'm very interested in what her group at Cambridge and other groups around the world are beginning to do now, because 2050 isn't absolutely fixed, it may happen sooner, may happen later. But how we around the boardroom table trying to take that longer term view and invest our people and our finances with a better notion of patient capital, say up until the year 250. And that's the place where I'm still interested. And you have done this work before. And when I come back to talk a little bit about CCGI, I'll come back to this. But you have already started work in that area, like it or not. And the people I'm beginning to look much more seriously at in terms of investing patient capital for the very long term are the sovereign wealth funds and the family offices. And that's where I think we need to begin to have a good look. That's my little 2 pence worth at the moment. I'll come back at the end, but thanks for listening to that.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. Kamala, you have any comments or comments from anybody else on the panel?
Well, I appreciate very much what Professor Garrett has said in that it's given us hope. The truth is, we are an intelligent people, and if we focus on the fact that we can learn and we can together work past through a lot of these crises, then it can take us into a kind of future that we are happy with. And to be honest, so there are two things that helps guide us, or guides me personally, and as a result, I think kind of guides CCGI. One is that this world has proven that we can do better. if we take a similar historical look at what Gillian did this morning, and we see how we have been able to get past a lot of the brutalities of centuries ago. So now we have children's rights as paramount, right? You no longer have the level very open child abuse and child labor and that kind of thing. We also have been able to bring the world to a place where women are no longer treated as chattels. We have been able to take our place and contribute, you know, to the world in fundamental ways. And there has been a lot too in terms of the changes. We've been able to appreciate the diversity of people, whether it's diversity in terms of their difference in religion, diversity in terms of the difference of people in their country and cultures. The world has grown to appreciate that so much more. So that I think gives me a lot of hope. And the other thing is the UN Sustainability Development Goals. The very last goal speaks to us having collaboration. And I think that is one of the keys to how we can overcome a lot of the challenges that we face today. That we don't exist in these challenges in silos as individuals, and we don't have to hurt as individuals silently. But we can work together and pool our strengths and our resources so that we can do better, because the world has demonstrated that we can do better. There's every reason for us to be optimistic. So I could pause there because I see Camille has her hand raised, and I know Camille always have some really profound things to share. So Camille, any chance that you would be able to put on your video as well and join us here?
Not a chance right now for the video. No.
Okay, go ahead.
Go ahead. We're hearing you loud and clear.
Good. And while we were talking and we were mentioning changing values, I wondered whether we had looked at the values of the Gen Zers, the younger folks, because what I am finding is that their values have changed in terms of what they put store on, how they want to operate. When we were talking about the pension and they're not staying anywhere very long, you know, moving from place to place. When we were talking about working 8 hours a day, they're not prepared to do that. Or this is what many of us are now finding. So I'm wondering if we need to stop and look and see what it is that they think of the world and how they want to spend their time, how they want to see it evolving. Because I think it's quite different to what we wanted in the past.
Yes, actually, Victoria Hurt did deal with that quite a bit in her presentation yesterday, when she talked about, you know, how do we have governance that encompasses a long-term well-being for all. And she spoke as well about the values that is embraced by the younger generation, their expectations of themselves, how they work, and their expectations in terms of the organizations as well. So yes, very important points that we also need to add to the mix. I see Catherine Kumar has put her video on, and definitely, I know Catherine, yesterday you had shared some insightful points for us. Is there anything you would like to add today as well to join the conversation?
Well, I think I put my video on because I wanted to add to that same point about taking into consideration what the young people, and young here you're talking about 21, 22, they're out of university, they're so different. Some of my nieces and nephews, I'm just amazed. One is working totally online in Trinidad, working with a US company, working in Trinidad, right now is in Colombia, and she just moves around all over the place with her computer. That's all that matters to her. She's not interested in pensions and what she will get at age 60 and nothing like that. Spend your money now, enjoy your life, travel the world. So I'm glad when I saw like Leslie talking, I mean, I just look at he has to be very young, and he talked about a different view, So he doesn't see crises, he sees opportunities and stuff like that, right? And I think it's important when we are formulating any sort of governance that we make sure, whether it's on our boards, whether it's on our committees, or so, we have the very young. We tend to think we say we have people in their 40s and on our committee, on our board, and that's young. But no, that's sorry, that's not young. Well, I think once you pass 35, you're now old in today's generation, right? So we need really young people and their views so we can see what they want the world to be like tomorrow. Hopefully it's not a disaster. And they, just like we worried, just like our parents are worried about us, and we are now worried about this younger generation and the children. They will find a way. So it's good to hear their views and input what they're thinking their future should be like.
Well, I think they definitely want all the little AIs, Chairman, because they don't want to work 7 hours a day.
For sure.
They don't want to work 7 hours.
I'm listening to that. The point is that if they enjoy what they do, they work very long, and they can balance, because I was listening to Jillian, and the whole question of, she wrote an article recently on WeWork and its demise, and the point that work is not some place you go to, it's something you do, and where you do it doesn't matter. And if people have work that they love and enjoy, where they do it, how they do it, with Leslie's help, with his little AI running around, they can be very productive and have the ability to socialize and enjoy their lives wherever. So the point is that, for me, for me, the failure is that we have not engaged them in a way that excites them and makes whatever we're trying to accomplish exciting for them. And if it's for me, as I tell people all the time, I enjoy what I do, so I don't call it work.
Yes.
But the point is that you have to make that connection, and it goes back to what we said earlier. You have to really care for your people. Do you know who these people are? Do you know what they want? Do you know what they like or dislike? And do they know your purpose? Because if they don't know your purpose and are not bought into it because you don't know your purpose, then what do you expect?
I used to subscribe to all of that, Mr. Chairman. I used to subscribe to all of that. And I could have said all of that. But I'm finding now, with the 21s and the 23s, the 24s, the 25s, they have an expectation that their life is to be multifaceted. So they want their social media, they want a variety of things. So whereas we used to say, yes, if you like what you do, you never work a day in your life. And, all of those kinds of things used to apply. I am now figuring out, I'm realizing I have to go back to the drawing board to actually determine what this younger set really values. And that has been the experience of many of us here in Jamaica. Coming out of COVID, we are realizing that we now have to ask them and not think that they think the way we did, which is what you just described, Mr. Chair.
No, and I agree with you. There has to be a conversation, and we have to start with questions, not answers. Sorry, Catherine, go ahead.
Yeah. No, I would like to support what Camille is saying, because, the truth is, we think we know what they want, but we don't at all, right? Because we have children, we think we know what the young ones want, but they don't. I mean, a very good example I would like to give, we are planning a family reunion with people from all ages, right? And we, as the siblings, figured, well, we would know what we're supposed to do during this family reunion to get them united, because the purpose is not for us to be united. We as the siblings already are. It's for the next generation. So we went ahead planning and everything. Then later on in the stage, we brought in some of the very younger ones. And oh my God, they messed up our whole agenda. Because what we thought would be good for them to get to know each other, they were not interested in. And we had to start all over and realize if the purpose of this is for them, we got to give them it how and what, what they want and how.
Yeah.
So I think it's the same thing. And then a little disagreement perhaps with Camille and more with what Nigel is. I think that it's not the younger generation are not prepared to work long hours. What they prepare to do is be very flexible. So my idea of 8 to 5 is not their idea. Again, come back to my niece. 11, she would go out, we go to Tobago on the beach, and she with us during the day on the beach. But look at her. As soon as 4 or 5 o'clock, she got on the computer and she there till 3 o'clock in the morning. So it's just different times from how. And that's to also accentuate the point that they want to do things their way. They want to have a balanced life. So I could go to the beach during the day, gives me, enjoyment and entertainment. But there's no reason why I can't work on the computer during the night, but I can't go on the beach during the night, right? So I use my daytime. I used to use my daytime. And that's what they're saying. And I think that's what we have to hear.
So, and I agree
with that.
Yeah, I agree with
you have to listen.
So the question is whether they are eventually prepared to work the 7 hours, if some of them may start at 2 a.m. The challenge we're going to have is where you have those businesses where you actually need people to be physically there in the day. But these are things that I just want to ensure that as we at CCGI look at governance and look at management, we recognize that there have been significant changes with this latest generation, or that is what we're certainly finding here, several of us in Jamaica.
Yep. So Professor Garrett, you had some words of wisdom for us on CCGI?
No, they weren't words of wisdom necessarily. I pick up Kamla's point on collaboration, but remember this is meant to be a global conference, and it's that global collaboration which interests me a lot. I mean, at the moment, if you look at the last 2 days, you are mining gold dust here. The quality of the inputs is really good, and I can span 5 of the 6 continents. And the quality of these discussions and the quality of some of the examples now beginning to emerge, you must begin to talk with others about this. I'm a great fan of Mel Brooks and people like that. In the famous film The Producers, he says, if you got it, flaunt it. And I think you may need to do a little less humility and a little more flaunting, not wild flaunting, but beginning to say, this is what we're doing, this is what we're discussing. Can we collaborate with you? Perhaps I'll just finish on the note that a very personal thing that happened in the last week to me. We've had Jane Valls a few times on our sessions here, the director of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the 6 nations across the Gulf, of their Board Development Institute. And she is now retiring at Christmas. And the new person coming in to take over is one called John Gollifer. John I knew in London and then down in Singapore. And then I was talking to him about his induction just last week, and he let go something which he most probably will now regret forever. But he let go the fact that he's actually Guyanese. And I immediately let Kamla know. And poor John doesn't stand a chance now. But if we can tap in to the vast resources they have in the Gulf, but tap into the quality of what you're doing, then that's an interesting collaboration I would be keen to pursue.
Great.
I finish at that point.
Thank you so very much. And I know that Kamla is going to do it, but I'm going to do it too.
Good.
I want to really thank you for your support,
My pleasure.
your advocacy, and you're making these connections on our behalf. And I know with once you do that, Kamala takes the ball and runs
Yes,
like a bat out of hell. But your leadership and your counsel and your guidance is critical. So thank you.
Thank you.
Kamala.
Thank you very much, Nigel, and thank you, Professor Garrett. Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, Camille. Thank you, everyone, who have contributed over these last 2 days to what, really has been a very, very good conference with some really exceptional points that's going to help us as we move forward in trying to come to terms with how do we govern effectively in this polycrisis world that's so filled with uncertainty and change that we now have to live with. I certainly have learned a lot over the last 2 days, but I also have been inspired to a great extent by a lot of what was shared by several of our speakers in terms of what are some of the lessons that they use that they help apply in helping us to govern more effectively in organizations. I want to bring this to an end now because I know we've had persons with us all 2 days, and I'm so grateful for all of you taking that time to join us because you exist in that world where there's so many different demands on your time. The fact that you have chosen to be here with us is really appreciated. And Catherine, I did see the question you just posed in the chat, which is, will any of the learnings be shared? So I want to reiterate what I shared in our opening this morning, which is that we make available all of these sessions publicly to everyone. First, it's available on our website. So it would be available on recorded events within a few days. So persons can go there and get the entire document, the entire videos, forgive me. But also we will be editing these and we'd share them on our YouTube channel so that persons would be able to come back and listen to again and pull some of the really great points that have been made in terms of how we can govern in this polycrisis. So I want to share that this global conference really is the brainchild of Professor Garrett. When we approached him in 2010 to say, 2020, forgive me, I just went back to CCGI. But yes, when we approached him in 2020 to say that we wanted to host Governance Week, and we wanted a really good opening keynote, but we had no money to pay an opening keynote. Professor Garrett was so open and to guiding us with how we can make this happen. And after joining us as our opening keynote for the first global conference for Governance Week, he suggested to us that we look at hosting a global conference because we have been able to pull so many people together using this online environment. And, he has been our guiding force in putting together the quality of conferences that we have held over these last few years. One of the things I want to commit to Professor Garrett is that next year we will resume our conversations with the International Learning Network so that we continue to take the conversation forward as we examine the changes that are unfolding around us and how best can we govern so that we can, and I want to use Brenda's words here, we build an economy of caring.
Great news.
Yes, we are able to then ensure that all of us are doing the best that we can to help each other, to lift each other. And we continue along this vein of collaboration so that there's synergy that allows us to do so much more together. So I want to thank everyone again. I have to thank you too, Nigel. I have to say, I mentioned at the start of today, but yes, I do put in a lot of work to bring the conference together, but truly Nigel takes the weight off me for the 2 days when he is here, ensuring that everything runs smoothly, that we have great conversations, that it's all managed well. I could not have asked for a better chairman.
Yeah,
Thank you so much.
You're
And
very
I
welcome. And thank
thank
you.
my team in the background, of course, Christy Johnson, the
Chrissy,
crowd.
yeah.
Yes, Christy has been doing a really human service with us over the last few years as we navigated the COVID crisis and have moved into this new space where we have a little bit more consistency in what we're doing. I also want to acknowledge my new executive assistant, Amelia, who has really contributed a lot in the few months that she's been here with me in terms of what we've been able to do. I think it's been a great year for us again at CCGI, and I'm really thankful to everyone. All of the persons who have stayed by our sides. Alistair, I have a very special thank you for you. I was boasting about the fact that we now have Belize as a member here with us at CCGI. So thank you so much for that. And certainly I agree with everyone. Dion Chamberlain was brilliant yesterday. So we would definitely be bringing her back. So we would hear some more Belizean voices as well as we move forward with our activities in the next year. Please note that this is all of us together, talking together, working together, trying to find what is the best solution that works for all of us. So we are open to everyone being able to contribute your thoughts and give us your feedback. How can we improve? How can we do better? What are the things that's going to enable us to be able to ensure that our governance reflects on the culture of the corporation, that people are able to benefit. So thank you all, and I appreciate the nice feedback I'm getting in the chat. So just a reminder, the link is there. Please click on that and give us your feedback for today. As you would have heard this morning, we do use it, so I give responses to it. So Catherine, thank you so much. Yes, as part of the startup of CCGI, as you were the chamber, thank you for those early years as well. When we held our 10th anniversary celebration last year, it was to acknowledge that we do have a strong foundation. Everyone would have contributed to bringing us to where we are today. And Lashade, thank you so much for that lovely comment as well, that there were quality presentations over the last few days. And I am so grateful that we have persons like yourself, Lashade, who will commit and be here so that you can benefit from our hours of work. Otherwise, it would be in vain. So thank you so much. I look forward to us all continuing to be together and to work together in this. All right.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Inshallah.